Okay, let's unpack this. Picture a singles night, right?
Yeah.
You've got folks hoping for a spark, maybe find a connection. Sounds like a recipe for, well, at least some mingling.
You'd think so.
But here's the kicker. This particular event had a grand total of 0 men show up.
0. Wow.
Yeah. And the women who made the effort were, understandably not thrilled. And this isn't just some bizarre one-off story. It's actually the springboard for today's deep dive.
What's really striking about this seemingly isolated scenario, which, by the way, comes to us from a pretty fascinating YouTube analysis, is how it throws a spotlight on a much bigger shift.
Yeah, that's correct.
It really forces us to ask what's causing this, well, this apparent withdrawal of men from more traditional dating scenes.
Exactly. So we're not just here to, chuckle about an empty room. Our mission today is to really get under the hood and explore the complex reason behind this trend. We're talking societal sea changes, the psychology at play, kind of the whole deal. Think of this as your fast track to understanding a pretty significant evolution in how relationships are forming.
Yeah.
Or maybe not forming in this case.
And the analysis we're looking at, it really brings the disappointment of that night to life. These women showed up with genuine hope, actually ready to connect.
Yeah.
But as the reality of the empty space dawned on them, that hope pretty quickly turned into frustration, even a sense of being disregarded,
You could almost feel that wave of disappointment, can't you? They
Yeah.
put themselves out there, made the effort, and were met with, nothing.
Crickets.
And the source makes it really clear this isn't just about a missed chance at finding a date. It's kind of a red flag, pointing to some deeper currents in the modern dating landscape.
Which leads us straight to the crucial question, why the absence? Why weren't they there?
Right.
The analysis suggests that men might be avoiding these kinds of events because of a significant pressure to perform. Yeah, it's not just about being present. There's this underlying expectation, maybe unspoken, that they need to meet certain criteria just to be, considered viable dating material.
Okay, so it's not enough to just, show up and be yourself anymore. There's this added pressure to be on, maybe always be the initiator, tick off some invisible boxes.
Right.
It sounds like a constant audition.
Precisely. And layering on top of that is this pervasive fear of judgment. The analysis we're looking at touches on how today's dating culture, often amplified by those curated realities we see on social media.
Oh, yeah, the highlight reels.
Exactly. It sets incredibly high, sometimes really superficial benchmarks. So men might feel like they're walking into a room where everyone already has this idealized picture of who they should be. Think about it. Those curated profiles online, they don't just show the best version. They create this environment of constant comparison. It kind of subtly signals that your average self might not cut it in this hyper-competitive market.
That performance anxiety must be huge then.
It can be a massive deterrent for actually showing up in person.
That's a really insightful point about the comparison thing. It's like everyone's putting their best foot forward all the time online. And that can be intimidating if you feel like your everyday life doesn't quite match that filtered reality.
Totally.
So for some men, choosing to skip these events becomes a way to sidestep that potential judgment, almost a form of self-protection.
That's another key aspect highlighted in the analysis. Avoiding potentially uncomfortable situations where maybe they feel unsure of the unspoken social codes, or they fear they won't fit in. It becomes a way to safeguard their ego,
Right.
to minimize potential vulnerability. And this fear isn't just surface-level discomfort. For a lot of men, it probably taps into deeper anxieties about their worthiness, their belonging, maybe even activating what psychologists call rejection sensitivity.
Okay, now this is where I started to see some real connections forming in the source material. This empty singles event, it's not happening in isolation. Right?
Not at all.
So how does it link to a broader disconnect in how men and women are navigating modern dating? What does that disconnect actually look like?
Well, the analysis really emphasizes that this absence reflects a more fundamental breakdown in communication and a divergence in expectations between men and women when it comes to relationships.
So different pages entirely.
Pretty much. The frustration voiced by the women in the source, it stems from this perception that men are, for whatever reason, just no longer investing the same effort in making connections. They express a genuine longing, for connection, for love, for simply feeling valued in those interactions.
Yeah.
And when men seemingly opt out, it fosters this growing sense of isolation and really deepens the chasm between the genders in the dating sphere.
So you have one group actively showing up, hoping for that connection and validation,
Yeah.
while the other appears to be retreating. It's like two people wanting to meet, but consistently missing the intended rendezvous point.
That's a good way to put it. And the analysis astutely points out that this isn't necessarily a case of one side being right or wrong.
Okay.
It suggests that both men and women are grappling with their own sets of insecurities and anxieties in this, like, evolving landscape. But their outward responses are manifesting differently.
How so?
Women might be actively seeking connection in these, let's say, traditional ways, showing up, while men might be pulling back, perhaps as a shield against uncertainty or fear.
That's a really crucial nuance. So it's not necessarily a lack of desire for connection on either side,
Probably not.
but maybe just different strategies for navigating the perceived risks and anxieties of modern dating.
Exactly. Different coping mechanisms, maybe.
So if that's the case, what are the potential pathways forward? How do we bridge this divide?
The source really underscores the critical need for more open and honest conversations. And perhaps more importantly, a greater willingness on both sides to embrace vulnerability and take relational risks.
Taking risks, that's key.
Yeah, because if we connect this to the bigger picture, consistently avoiding potentially vulnerable situations, while it might offer that sense of immediate comfort or safety, it ultimately limits the possibilities for forging those meaningful, lasting bonds we all kind of crave.
Okay, so this trend of men avoiding these in-person events, it isn't just some quirky anomaly then.
No, the analysis connects it to a broader shift. Men seem to be gravitating towards less conventional avenues for meeting people, or maybe even becoming less actively involved in the dating scene altogether.
Like dating apps.
Exactly. Think about the dominance of dating apps versus the maybe decline in attendance at these more traditional gatherings.
Yeah, you hear about that a lot.
And the discouragement reported by women about the difficulty of finding partners willing to invest genuine effort. And here, the source really emphasizes emotional presence and commitment.
Not just showing up physically.
Right. Not just physical presence, upastithi. Relationships, as the analysis reminds us, they thrive on that deeper emotional engagement.
And this leads us to consider another significant factor, right? The immense societal pressures that are placed on men.
Oh, absolutely.
The analysis touches on this, acknowledging the expectation for men to be not only emotionally available, but also financially secure, professionally successful. It's a pretty substantial list of demands,
It really is.
especially while simultaneously trying to navigate the often murky waters of modern relationships.
So in this context, opting out of a singles event could definitely be seen as a way for men to sidestep some of that added pressure.
Yeah, just avoid the whole thing.
And this increasing expectation for men to perform in dating is absolutely intertwined with our evolving understanding of gender roles and expectations.
It's almost like the traditional script, the man pursues, is being rewritten in real time. But the new version is still kind of in draft form, leading to the sense of uncertainty, maybe even paralysis, for some men who aren't sure how to play their part anymore.
That's a great way to put it. And the analysis also sheds light on the role of technology in this evolving dynamic.
Okay, the apps again.
Yeah. Men are increasingly turning to online dating platforms, perhaps seeking a greater sense of control over the process, and maybe a perceived buffer against the immediate vulnerability of face-to-face interactions. There's potentially a sense of lower stakes there, the ability to maintain some emotional distance, avoid that direct in-person rejection.
But there's definitely a trade-off there, isn't there?
Yeah.
You gain the convenience of swiping and messaging,
Sure.
but you potentially lose out on the richness and, the vulnerability that comes with genuine, real-world connections.
Absolutely. The source hints at a potential decline in those crucial social skills that are often honed through in-person interactions, navigating those more nuanced social cues.
Yeah, reading the room, basically.
Exactly. And circling back to expectations, the analysis revisits how societal pressures and the images we're constantly bombarded with through media often create these unrealistic standards for both men and women. But for men, that underlying fear of being judged as, well, not measuring up to these often unattainable ideals can be a significant reason to avoid entering those initial dating scenarios altogether.
It's like the whole dating process can feel like an audition, and if you don't feel like you've got the perfect resume, why even bother showing up? The constant pressure to project an image of confidence, to always have it all together, that's a pretty heavy load to carry.
And at the very core of this reluctance, the analysis identifies a really fundamental emotion, the fear of rejection.
Ah, okay.
That seems key.
It seems to be a central thread weaving through many of the factors we've been discussing.
So it's not just about potential awkward small talk or, stumbling over your words.
No, it's deeper.
It's this much deeper fear of being turned down, of not being perceived as good enough.
Precisely. And this fear, the analysis suggests, is often amplified for men because of those societal expectations surrounding male success, both personal and romantic.
Experiencing rejection can feel like more than just a minor dating setback. It can tap into deeper insecurities, feel like a fundamental challenge to a man's sense of self-worth, especially within the often critical landscape of modern dating.
So by not even showing up to the singles event, these men are, in a way, preemptively shielding themselves from that potential sting of rejection.
Seems like it. It's a strategy of avoidance as a form of self-preservation.
And this links directly to the broader and often more difficult topic of vulnerability, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Men are frequently conditioned, often from a young age, to suppress their emotions, right? To avoid appearing weak or needy.
The man up thing.
Exactly. An event like a singles night inherently requires a degree of emotional risk-taking. And that underlying fear of rejection can make that risk feel overwhelmingly high. This societal emphasis on stoicism and emotional distance in men, it only serves to intensify that fear and make these kinds of events feel even more daunting.
You can really see how all these pieces fit together now. The pressure to embody this ideal of masculinity, the underlying fear of not measuring up, and then the very real possibility of facing rejection. Yeah, it creates a pretty challenging environment.
Definitely.
And for some, choosing not to participate at all might just feel like the least difficult path.
The analysis also touches on this fear of being judged for not meeting those idealized standards of, say, physical appearance or professional success.
Right, the whole package.
Further contributing to this pattern of avoidance. And online dating, with its carefully curated profiles and chances for selective self-presentation, offers a stark contrast to the raw vulnerability of an in-person social event.
So the digital screen acts as a kind of buffer, offering a sense of safety from that immediate face-to-face judgment.
Seems like it could, yeah. But as we discussed earlier, that perceived safety comes at a potential cost.
The cost of real connection.
Of developing genuine, meaningful connections in the real world. And while avoiding rejection might provide temporary relief, the analysis points out that it ultimately hinders opportunities for personal growth.
Right.
And, the potential for forming those deeper, more significant connections. Rejection, as uncomfortable as it is,
It's part of life.
it is. It's a normal, even necessary part of life, offering valuable opportunities for learning and building resilience.
Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about how our very understanding of masculinity is changing. The source material delves into this pretty deeply,
It does.
explaining how the traditional definition, often centered around like dominance and emotional detachment, is gradually shifting towards a greater need for balance, incorporating emotional sensitivity and a broader range of expression.
This evolution, while undoubtedly positive in many respects, can also create a sense of, uncertainty, even confusion for men. They might find themselves unsure of how to navigate relationships effectively within this changing landscape. The more traditional roles, where men were often expected to be the sole initiators, the drivers of courtship,
Yeah.
they're becoming increasingly blurred as women also embrace greater agency in dating.
Right. Women are initiating more too.
Exactly. And the rise of online dating has further complicated these dynamics, often bypassing traditional in-person courtship rituals and sometimes placing greater emphasis on more superficial, profile-based qualities.
It's like the old dating playbook has been tossed out, and everyone's trying to figure out the new rules as they go along.
Something like that. And the constant pressure on men to present this idealized, constantly performing version of themselves both online and in person, it must be incredibly draining.
Yeah.
And can definitely lead to a feeling of inauthenticity.
And that underlying fear of rejection, as we've discussed, it inevitably resurfaces here, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. In a society that often places such a high value on external validation, the potential for being deemed not good enough can be deeply discouraging. The analysis also draws a connection between the intense pressure to achieve career and financial success and men's overall sense of self-worth.
Which ties back into dating.
Directly impacts how they approach dating. It's all interconnected.
It's a real tangle of factors, isn't it?
Yeah.
The ingrained ideal of the stoic, strong man, bumping up against the growing understanding of the importance of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
It's no wonder men might find it challenging to express vulnerability and connect authentically.
The source even suggests a link between these shifting definitions of masculinity and the increasing rates of emotional isolation experienced by men.
Wow. Okay, digging deeper into the societal pressures then.
Yeah.
The analysis really elaborates on the significant burden placed on men concerning emotional availability.
Right. Those long-standing cultural norms that equate stoicism with strength can inadvertently disconnect men from their own emotional landscapes.
Which, as we've touched on, impacts their capacity to form deep relationships.
Profoundly. It's like they're given this unspoken rule book from a young age. Big boys don't cry, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that message can be incredibly difficult to unlearn, even as adults trying to navigate complex emotional terrain. The constant pressure to be the strong one, always in control, never showing weakness.
Does make it tough.
It must make it incredibly challenging, not only to be receptive to others' emotions, but even to acknowledge and process their own feelings in a healthy way.
Exactly. And this pattern of emotional repression, as the analysis points out, isn't just a hurdle in romance. It's also significantly linked to mental health challenges men face.
Disproportionately, yeah.
And their documented reluctance to seek help when they need it. There's still a significant societal stigma around men expressing vulnerability or admitting they're struggling.
There really is. But the source does offer a glimmer of optimism here, highlighting the growing movement that encourages men to embrace vulnerability and challenge these outdated notions of masculinity.
That's good.
It seems like society is slowly beginning to recognize that true strength lies not in emotional suppression, but in emotional honesty and resilience.
But still a way to go.
As the analysis suggests, yeah, there's still a considerable distance to travel in fully redefining what it means to be a man today.
Now, let's delve further into the role that modern dating apps play in all this.
Okay.
The analysis suggests these platforms can inadvertently foster a more transactional perspective on relationships.
That's the idea, where superficial traits and quick judgments are often prioritized over cultivating deeper connections.
Yeah.
The experience of being reduced to just a brief profile, as the source points out, can certainly contribute to and reinforce feelings of inadequacy in men.
Like you're just shopping online?
Kind of, yeah. Browsing profiles, making quick judgments based on limited info, potentially discarding options without much emotional investment rather than, getting to know a whole person.
It's like you're a product on a digital shelf, being assessed based on a few photos and a short bio. Doesn't leave much room for personality or quirks initially.
Not really. And the sheer abundance of options on these apps creates what's known as the paradox of choice.
Right. Too many choices.
Often leading to decision fatigue and a sense that there might always be someone better just a swipe away, which can hinder investing in any one connection.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, the pressure to constantly present that idealized version of oneself online also contributes to a significant sense of emotional dissonance.
You're almost trying to embody who you think other people want you to be rather than just being yourself. That sounds exhausting.
It has to be. And ultimately, quite unsatisfying, you think.
Yeah.
The analysis also emphasizes the often superficial nature of conversations on these platforms,
Yeah, the back and forth can be pretty basic.
making it challenging to establish real emotional intimacy. Those brief exchanges don't typically allow for the vulnerability needed to build meaningful connections.
And the casual nature can lead to less accountability.
Unfortunately, yes, with the phenomenon of ghosting being a prime and often painful example.
Ghosting, that sudden disappearance. The source rightly highlights the impact that can have on feelings of rejection and self-doubt. Like a digital dismissal.
Exactly. Leaves you wondering what went wrong, questioning your own worth.
Yeah.
And the constant pursuit of validation, likes, matches, fleeting interactions can unfortunately take a toll on men's self-esteem, potentially tying their self-worth to external digital approval rather than internal confidence. The emphasis on instant gratification inherent in these platforms can also cultivate impatience when it comes to the more gradual process of building genuine relationships.
You expect things to happen fast, and if they don't, maybe just move on to the next profile.
That temptation is there, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a fast-paced digital environment that doesn't always lend itself to the slower, more organic unfolding of real-world connection.
Okay, finally, the analysis delves into the pervasive culture of perfectionism and the toll it takes, particularly on men.
Right. This immense pressure to meet often unrealistic expectations, appearance, career, emotional resilience.
The whole package again.
Yeah, often fueled by those curated realities on social media, it creates incredibly difficult benchmarks to achieve.
It's like there's this invisible checklist for being a successful man, and if you don't tick all the boxes, there's this feeling of inadequacy. Social media definitely amplifies that.
Totally. Everyone's showing their highlight reel, rarely the struggles.
Right.
This internalization of feeling inadequate, coupled with the pressure to always appear strong and in control, can lead to significant emotional detachment. The relentless focus on appearance can overshadow deeper self-worth issues, and the drive for external career success might leave men feeling internally unfulfilled.
And that emotional suppression we talked about just isolates them further.
Exactly. It hinders their ability to form strong, supportive relationships. Plus, the societal pressure to be fiercely independent, to never need help,
Prevents them from reaching out.
yeah, it becomes this self-perpetuating cycle. Pressure to be perfect, inevitable failure to always meet those standards, the resulting shame and failure, then further withdrawal and disconnection.
It's a tough cycle to break.
Very. And the analysis rightly emphasizes that these pressures don't just harm men individually, they also contribute to the broader societal issue of toxic masculinity and its limitations.
So it affects everyone.
It really does. It calls for a more widespread cultural shift towards a more inclusive, compassionate, and realistic understanding of what it truly means to be a man today.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, it's really clear that the reasons behind men seemingly stepping back from traditional dating settings like our initial sparsely attended singles event are multifaceted, deeply interconnected.
Yeah, it's not simple.
It's not just one thing. It's a complex interplay of, fear of rejection, significant societal pressures, evolving masculinity, the double-edged sword of technology, and those often unattainable ideals permeating our culture.
And the analysis we've explored makes it clear this isn't about assigning blame to one side or the other, right? It's about gaining a deeper understanding of a significant cultural shift that's currently shaping modern dating and impacting both men and women in really profound ways.
So, here's a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. Reflecting on these insights into the dynamics of modern dating, how might this understanding inform your own expectations? And maybe the way you approach building meaningful connections, regardless of your gender. What small shift in perspective, or maybe even action, could you potentially take to contribute to bridging this evident gap and fostering more authentic connections in your own life?
Okay, so you're someone who likes to get right to the heart of these really complex issues without having to wade through endless articles and books and reports and all that stuff. And today that is exactly what we are doing. We are diving deep into a really significant societal shift.
Okay.
The growing challenges faced by young men.
And we're not just, kind of speculating or,
Right.
just talking off the top of our heads.
Yeah.
We've got some pretty compelling material to unpack here.
Exactly.
We've got a recent report from the UK's Centre for Social Justice
Okay.
called Lost Boys, which came out just this past March 2025.
Yeah.
And also a really fascinating discussion on the Diary of a CEO YouTube channel,
Oh, yeah.
which featured a behavioral scientist and dating coach
Okay.
alongside a data expert from Hinge.
Interesting combination.
Yeah, so a lot of insights there.
That's super
A
interesting.
lot of really good data as well.
Yeah, and our aim here is not just to throw statistics at you.
Yeah.
We really want to try to understand why are these challenges emerging?
Yeah,
What are the key insights that really matter here?
exactly.
And can we identify any potential paths forward? Not just for young men themselves, but for society as a whole.
Right, because, when you look at the data and some of the personal stories contained within these sources,
Yeah.
the picture that emerges is actually quite stark.
Yeah.
There's a genuine sense of an emerging crisis that we need to understand.
Okay, well, let's start to unpack that then.
Yeah.
Both the Lost Boys report and the Diary of a CEO discussion highlight this really worrying trend in the educational and economic landscape.
Okay.
So the Hinge data expert, the guy from Hinge,
Right.
pointed to a significant 40% increase in males aged 16 to 24
Okay.
who are not in education or employment.
Wow.
So NEET, as they call them.
Yeah.
Not in education, employment, or training.
Right.
And that's in the UK specifically, so that's a huge chunk of young men
Yep.
who are basically disconnected from both learning and earning.
Yeah.
And that obviously has huge implications for, building a stable future,
Yeah.
not just for them, but for society as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
the Diary of a CEO discussion also touched on this reverse gender gap that's been talked about,
Oh, yeah.
where young women are now out-earning young men,
Okay.
particularly those under 30 in urban areas.
Yeah.
They even showed like a graph illustrating this shift.
Yeah, and you'd think initially that's like, a win.
Right.
Obviously it reflects positive progress for women's financial success.
Exactly.
But the behavioral scientist on the show raised this really crucial point.
Right.
Are boys being left behind in this evolving economic landscape?
Right.
Are they lacking the skills and the opportunities to thrive in the modern job market?
Yeah, I think what's really fascinating here is like the evolution of what's considered a valuable skill.
Yeah.
Right. So we've seen this decline in traditional vocational training.
Yeah. Like, what do you mean?
Things like, auto mechanics
Right.
or woodworking,
Yeah.
which, historically were viable career paths for a lot of men.
Right.
Those fields have largely been replaced by, areas like computer science,
Yeah.
which is important, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But it might not align with like the interests or aptitudes
Yeah.
of the 2/3 of males who don't pursue like a traditional liberal arts degree.
So it's almost like we're funneling everybody into this one very specific kind of skill set,
Exactly.
which is a problem if not everybody is cut out for that.
If not everybody's interested in that.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's not just about the job market.
Right.
The data expert also highlighted some really striking statistics within the education system itself.
Oh, okay.
Apparently 70% of valedictorians in the U.S. are female.
Wow.
And women are more likely to be in the top 10% of their class,
Interesting.
which suggests a potential mismatch between how the current educational environment
Yeah.
is serving boys.
Right.
Even though like their SAT scores are on par with young women.
Yeah. It definitely raises questions about whether the current like co-ed educational
Yeah.
model
Yeah.
adequately serves like the different needs of boys.
And then we even heard this anecdote from like an anonymous teacher
Oh, yeah.
about an increase in disruptive behavior
Okay.
among young boys,
Interesting.
which they linked to a potential lack of clear boundaries at home
Okay.
and unsupervised access to the internet and pornography,
Right.
which could be distorting their understanding of what's like acceptable behavior.
Yeah.
And that kind of bleeds into
Yeah.
another really significant factor that was highlighted in both of our sources,
Okay.
which is the role of fatherlessness.
Right.
So the data expert cited figures from the National Fatherhood Initiative,
Okay.
which is a U.S. organization.
Mm.
They said that a full 25% of young boys in the U.S.
Wow.
live without a biological step or adoptive father.
Okay.
And apparently, the U.S. has the highest rate of children in single-parent households. Globally, yeah.
That's a lot.
And the mother alone in 92% of those cases.
Wow.
That's a pretty dramatic shift from 1968,
Right.
when it was only 11%.
And what is it now?
21% in 2020.
Wow.
So it's almost doubled in, that
Yeah.
that period.
That's a huge shift.
Yeah, so that's like a really significant shift in family structure,
Yeah.
which obviously could have profound implications for young men.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we connect this directly to the Lost Boys report,
Yeah.
it actually points to some very concerning correlations
Okay.
between the absence of a father figure
Right.
and some negative outcomes for young men,
Okay.
including a higher likelihood of involvement in drug and gun-related activities,
Yeah.
drug dealing,
Yeah.
and experiencing mental health issues.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And the behavioral scientist on The Diary of a CEO brought up the,
Okay, yeah.
complex realities of father absence as well.
Well-
It's not always just a simple case of abandonment. There are obviously challenges within family courts and, legal systems and all that. And
Yeah.
even like just the natural evolution of relationships with older children.
Right.
Where, a non-resident parent
Yeah.
might miss out on those like everyday informal moments that
Yeah.
actually build connection.
Totally.
Yeah,
No, that's a really good point.
it's complicated.
It is.
And this leads us to like the emotional and social challenges that young men might be grappling with.
Yeah.
So the behavioral scientist shared a statistic which I found actually quite sobering
Okay.
about the disproportionately higher suicide rate among sexually abused boys compared to girls.
Oh, wow.
Which, suggests that maybe boys face unique vulnerabilities
Yeah.
or they have different coping mechanisms for dealing with that kind of trauma.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because like we always hear about, the girls and women and how they're affected by sexual
Yeah.
abuse. But the boys, it's almost like we don't talk about it as much.
And there's potentially like a significant societal stigma that prevents boys from openly discussing their struggles, from seeking help.
Yeah.
The behavioral scientists mentioned how it was only recently that someone like Lewis Howes,
Right.
a very successful guy,
Yeah.
openly talked about his experience of childhood sexual abuse.
Right. And he's in a position to do that now.
Yeah.
Like how many other people who aren't in that kind of position
Exactly.
are just keeping it bottled up?
Yeah. And then we have that kind of bleeds back into the anonymous teachers' observations, about increasing disruptive behavior in young boys stemming from this lack of boundaries and unsupervised online access.
And that brings us back to the debate around the co-ed classroom.
Yeah.
Right. So there was even a suggestion within the podcast discussion itself that maybe we should consider delaying formal education for some boys or incorporating more hands-on practical play into their learning. The fact that like single-sex boys' schools often have significantly more recess time points to this potential need for like different learning environments that are tailored to boys' developmental needs.
And what I find really interesting is that for a long time, even acknowledging the critical role of fathers in boys' lives was seen as this kind of controversial topic.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And the behavioral scientists shared this observation that boys, over time may become less receptive to their mother's guidance. And might actually require a different kind of male presence for setting those boundaries and
providing
direction.
Right.
Yeah, so this lack of consistent male involvement in various aspects of a boy's life. At home, in schools with fewer male teachers. In after-school programs, within the community, that seems to be like a really significant contributing factor to the challenges that we're seeing.
Right.
And the image of a prison guard potentially being the first consistent male role model for some young men is like a pretty powerful and troubling one.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we can see that these aren't just like isolated problems.
Right.
The Lost Boys report articulated this really well. They basically said that these are likely symptoms of a deeper issue. Boys growing up without sufficient guidance, discipline, and a clear sense of purpose.
Right.
And that kind of inevitably connects to the broader societal and economic shifts that we're experiencing.
Exactly. Yeah, right. Totally.
So the data expert on the Diary of a CEO argued that our current economic policies and the strong emphasis on a 4-year college degree as like the primary route to success that disproportionately benefits a very small segment of the population. This so-called superclass of 1%ers.
Right.
And this can leave individuals who might be considered unremarkable, by those traditional metrics, with fewer opportunities for upward economic mobility. And the stark contrast between UCLA's acceptance rate then 76% versus now 9%.
Wow.
Really underscores how competitive and potentially exclusionary, like those traditional pathways have become.
Yeah, it's this winner-takes-all dynamic, which seems to have a ripple effect across like various facets of society. So the data expert actually pointed to widening disparities in health outcomes. The decline in marriage rates. Marriage increasingly becoming like a luxury item that's more prevalent in higher income brackets, especially for men. And then even a decline in birth rates.
Yeah, it's all connected.
Yeah, it is.
And that brings us to the very complained topic of the dating crisis and the evolving dynamics between genders. So the behavioral scientists on the show reiterated this growing mating gap where highly educated, successful women are increasingly finding a lack of male partners who they perceive as comparable in terms of, education and success.
Yeah, and the concept of hypergamy, which essentially describes this tendency for women to seek partners of equal or higher economic and social standing. That's being amplified by this changing landscape. So as more women achieve significant educational and professional success, the pool of men who meet their traditional expectations may be shrinking. Leading to challenges in finding suitable partners.
And the projection that we're going to have significantly more female than male college graduates in the future, like, just intensifies that concern.
Totally.
And the behavioral scientists also made this really good point that women's expectations in dating have evolved.
Okay.
Right? So emotional intelligence is increasingly becoming like this key factor in what women are looking for in a partner.
Right.
Whereas a lot of men may have been raised with a more traditional provider mindset and might not have developed those emotional skills to the same extent.
So there's almost like a skills gap.
Yeah, there's a mismatch.
Right.
It's important to acknowledge, though, the nuances around the pay gap here.
Okay.
While the data expert noted that young women in some urban areas are indeed earning more than their male counterparts.
Okay.
That trend often shifts when women take on the primary caregiving responsibilities associated with motherhood.
Yeah.
And then there's this valid concern that if women are becoming greater economic contributors, there needs to be a corresponding shift in men's contributions within the household in childcare. And a lot of women report feeling like that logistical shift isn't happening equitably.
Right.
And then the behavioral scientist also brought up what they called the high heels effect.
The high heels effect.
Okay. Where a significant number of women express a preference for taller men.
Okay.
So the use of height filters on dating apps can inadvertently exclude a large segment of the male population.
Yeah.
Contributing to this feeling of a limited pool of available partners for women.
Right.
And increased rejection for men.
Yeah. And then we have this phenomenon of Portia polygamy.
Portia polygamy. Okay.
Which is basically this idea that a small percentage of highly desirable men have a multitude of options.
Yeah.
Which might disincentivize them from pursuing long-term monogamous relationships.
Right.
And meanwhile, a significant portion of other men are finding themselves largely excluded from the dating market altogether.
Yeah.
So it creates this real imbalance.
And then we kind of layer on top of that the rise of online dating itself.
Right.
Which seems to be a major factor in these shifting dynamics.
Yeah.
So the behavioral scientists suggested that women's potential experiences with highly desirable men online could be inflating their expectations for all potential partners.
Right.
So it's like, you
get a taste of the top tier.
Exactly.
And it's hard to go back.
And then everybody's chasing the same small pool of guys.
Right. The data expert actually highlighted that tendency for many women on these platforms to gravitate towards the same limited pool of highly rated men.
Right.
Which leads to widespread frustration and rejection for the majority of male users.
And then they shared that statistic about an average attractiveness man on Tinder needing around 1,000 swipes.
Wow.
Just to get one coffee date.
That's rough.
So you can see how that would lead to men like opting out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of traditional societal engagement.
Yeah, so that's where we see the neat statistics in the UK coming into play.
Right.
Some men might turn to like online validation.
Yeah.
Through avenues like pornography, Reddit communities, or what are known as like red-pilled communities. Yeah, so these are like online groups.
Okay.
With specific, often critical perspectives on like gender and society.
Yeah, so they kind of go down this rabbit hole.
Right, and the behavioral scientist rightly expressed concern.
Yeah.
About the emergence of figures like Andrew Tate.
Right.
Who in the absence of positive role models can unfortunately become problematic father figures for some young men.
Yeah, and then there was this really concerning statistic that was shared that a man who hasn't lived with or married someone by the age of 30 has like a significantly higher likelihood of experiencing substance abuse.
Oh, wow.
So you can really see how important like social connection and intimacy are for men's well-being.
Right.
And then you layer on top of that.
Yeah.
The data expert also raised this really crucial question.
Okay.
Where can men even demonstrate a sense of excellence or value in a society where we have fewer traditional avenues for this?
Right.
Like long-term employment in a single company, active involvement in community organizations, even religious institutions where these social bonds were historically formed. Like those things are all in decline.
We're also seeing this increasing political polarization between genders.
Yeah.
So on average, women are leaning more liberal and, for the first time in history, more men than women attending church.
Wow.
In some regions.
That is fascinating.
And the behavioral scientist highlighted some key dating paradoxes.
Dating paradoxes. I
Yeah.
like that term.
That really encapsulate like the challenges of
Yeah.
navigating modern relationships.
Yeah. Tell me about those.
Okay, so the first one
Yeah.
is that while women are increasingly becoming like economic providers,
Yeah.
they still often desire emotional support from men
Right.
who may not have been raised with the skills or like the societal permission
Yeah.
to readily offer it.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's like
Yeah.
they're expected to be the provider, but also like the emotionally in tune.
Exactly. And then the second paradox
Yeah.
is this idea that while there's a call for men to be more open and vulnerable,
Right.
there can still be a societal discomfort or even shaming
Yeah.
when men actually do express vulnerability.
Yeah.
So it's like this double bind.
It's like damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There was a quote that they shared that I thought was really interesting.
Okay.
They said that a woman would rather see me die on the white horse than fall off of it.
Wow.
And I think that really illustrates like the pressure
Right.
for men to always project this strength.
Yeah. Interesting.
And then the third key paradox is that while many women express this desire for men to take initiative and lead,
Yeah.
there's also this increased sense of fear and the potential for public shaming
Oh, right. Yeah.
in like the Me Too era, compounded by like online dater shaming.
That's our shaming
Yeah.
where negative experiences are shared so widely.
Exactly. So it creates this real tension for men
Yeah.
who are trying to navigate romantic interactions.
That's super fascinating.
Yeah, it's tricky.
So given all these complex, interconnected challenges,
Right.
the big question is, where do we go from here?
Yeah, what are the solutions?
Yeah, what are some potential solutions and positive steps forward?
Okay, so the behavioral scientist really emphasized
Yeah.
the urgent need to forge a new definition of modern masculinity,
Okay.
one that embraces both traditional strengths like responsibility and provision,
Right.
alongside essential qualities like emotional intelligence and empathy.
Okay, so it's kind of like a both and.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the idea of men's groups was highlighted
Okay.
as a really promising potential solution.
Interesting.
So these groups can provide a safe and supportive masculine space
Yeah.
for emotional expression, mutual accountability,
Okay.
and peer-to-peer advice on navigating these challenges.
Yeah, I like that.
And they gave this really interesting example of a magician's men's group.
A magician's men's group.
Yeah. And it had this really structured approach, using Post-it notes focused discussion and an emphasis on accountability.
Okay.
It was a really interesting model.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard a lot about men's groups.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm always a little bit wary of them.
Yeah.
But, if they're done well,
Yeah.
they can be really powerful.
And I think what was interesting was the observation that men in these groups sometimes need to consciously work on being less focused on humor
Oh, that's interesting.
to facilitate deeper, more meaningful conversations.
Yeah, like not using humor as like a defense mechanism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the behavioral scientists also acknowledged the significant amount of emotional labor that women often contribute in relationships,
Yeah.
sometimes feeling as though they are raising their male partners
Right.
in certain aspects of emotional maturity.
Right. So they end up having to do all the emotional heavy lifting.
Right. And then the detrimental impact of pornography was also discussed.
Yeah, that's a big one.
With like the staggering statistic about its massive share of internet traffic.
Yeah.
Its potential to negatively influence perceptions of relationships,
Right.
diminish the desire for real-life connection, and hinder the development of crucial social skills.
Yeah, it's a serious concern.
Yeah, and the emergence of like no-fap communities suggests a growing awareness.
No FAP, like
Yeah.
abstaining from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the discussion also kind of went into
Yeah.
the potential negative consequences of increasingly sophisticated AI companions and sex robots
Right.
on like the fundamental human desire for real intimate relationships.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah. So if artificial connections can seemingly fulfill certain needs,
Right.
what impact will that have on the motivation to navigate
Right.
the complexities of genuine human connection?
Right. And then they talked about the importance of developing rejection resilience.
Rejection resilience.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the ability to cope with and learn from setbacks,
Right.
which, may be less developed in younger generations
Yeah.
due to, various factors.
Like what?
The social isolation of the pandemic?
Oh, right.
a societal tendency to maybe shield young people from failure.
Okay.
You know, there was an interesting observation from a former dean at Brown University
Wow.
about students' increased anxiety around failure,
Wow.
which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
And then the behavioral scientists offered some like practical advice for young men.
Okay.
So Scott's recommendation to recognize their capital of time.
Capital of time. I like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And strategically reinvest that time
Right.
in areas like physical fitness.
Yeah.
Recognizing strength as a foundational aspect of masculinity,
Right.
developing financial literacy and a career plan,
Uh-huh.
and actively practicing kindness.
Those are all good ones.
Those were his big ones.
Yeah, solid advice.
Yeah, and then Logan built on that,
Okay.
emphasizing the importance of cultivating personal passions,
Yeah.
adopting a growth mindset focused on continuous self-improvement,
Right.
and consciously prioritizing effort in their relationships. Things like remembering important details and planning thoughtful dates.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, and his point that men can often be better than 90% of the competition
Wow.
just by consistently doing the basic things well
Right.
is like an encouraging and actionable message.
I love that.
I like that too.
Yeah.
And then I really appreciated Logan's clothing in the closet analogy.
The clothing in the closet. Okay. What was that?
Yeah, so instead of solely focusing on
Yeah.
creating a checklist of desired qualities in a partner,
Right.
he encouraged individuals to reflect on the clothes,
Yeah.
like the personal qualities that they themselves possess,
Yeah.
and whether they are the kind of person that someone else would actively choose.
I see.
So it's like kind of flipping the script.
Yeah. It shifts the focus to self-awareness and personal development.
Exactly.
I like that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And then the discussion also touched on like the unique struggles faced by successful women in the dating world,
Oh.
whether it's encountering intimidation from some men.
Or making the conscious choice to pursue single motherhood,
Okay.
you know? And the increasing prevalence of polyamorous relationships was also briefly mentioned,
Interesting.
you know, as another potential shift
Right.
in how people are forming connections.
Yeah.
And then they talked about the role of feminism,
Right.
recognizing its positive contributions to gender equality,
Yeah.
but also acknowledging potential unintended consequences.
Like what?
Or the societal pressures it might contribute to, like the expectation for women to have it all simultaneously,
Right.
you know? And then Scott offered a more traditional perspective,
Yeah.
highlighting the enduring importance of economic viability for men
Right.
within a capitalist system,
Okay.
referencing the classic framework of provider, protector, procreator.
Yeah.
And then they shared that deeply concerning statistic that
Okay.
words like worthless and useless
Wow.
frequently appear in the suicide notes of young men.
Yeah, that's heavy.
Yeah, which really underscores that profound connection between
Yeah.
economic struggles and their sense of self-worth and identity.
Right.
And then Scott proposed these dating boot camp modules.
Dating boot camp.
Yeah, focusing on areas like developing a sense of humor,
Yeah.
building confidence through posture,
Right.
practicing good male manners, prioritizing physical fitness,
Yeah.
developing financial skills and entrepreneurial thinking,
Okay.
and improving conflict resolution through active listening.
Oh, wow. Those are really good.
Yeah, it's like a whole curriculum.
It is.
And then he emphasized what he called the 3 legs of the stool
3 legs of the stool.
Yeah.
Of masculinity.
of healthy masculinity.
Okay.
Being a provider,
Okay.
demonstrating discipline, and having a plan.
Right.
Being a protector,
Uh-huh.
practicing good manners and defending the vulnerable.
Yeah.
And being a procreator,
Okay.
desiring meaningful relationships and family.
Right. And the fact that the desire for procreation now seemingly needs to be taught.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Is a concerning indicator of like a potential societal disconnect,
Yeah.
right? And the statistics on declining birth rates globally,
Yeah.
particularly the stark example of South Korea
Yeah.
and the ongoing decline in